The string of fairy lights above the rooftop garden flickered once, and for half a second the entire skyline of Seattle went dark behind Tahlia Brooks's shoulders. Then it came back, brighter, and she realized her hands were shaking around a velvet box she had not asked anyone to give her. "Pick a venue," the man across from her said, in that low, unbothered voice that made waiters straighten their spines from 40 feet away. "The Vineyard in Walla Walla, or the Conservatory downtown. I bought options on both." Tahlia laughed. It came out wrong. Too high, too thin. "Dosen, we have been on exactly one date. 1 date and 4 months of you pretending we weren't." That's not how this works." She set the box down on the table like it might detonate. Beyond the glass railing, the city held its breath. Somewhere below them, a black car idled with 2 men in it who never seemed to sleep, and she'd stopped pretending she didn't notice those either. "Normal people date for years. They meet the family. They fight about whose turn it is to do dishes. They don't put deposits on conservatories after 1 plate of bulgogi." Kang Dosen folded his hands. He had the stillness of a man who had learned, somewhere in a life she only knew the edges of, that the person who moved first usually lost. "I'm not normal people, and neither are you, or you wouldn't still be sitting here." That was the thing that gutted her, because she was still sitting here. 6 months ago, Tahlia Brooks had been 34, 2 months behind on rent in a city that ate paychecks for breakfast, and so used to being the one who gave that she had forgotten her own name in the mouths of the people she gave to. She had a sister who called only when the rent was due, a boss who signed her work with his own name, a reflection she avoided in elevator doors. And now there was a man, a dangerous, infuriating, impossibly gentle man, telling her he had already chosen the flowers. "Why me?" she said. Not a question, an accusation. "You could have anyone. People who understand your world. People who wouldn't ask the questions I'm going to ask." For the first time all night, something cracked in his composure. His jaw tightened. The fairy lights caught the silver at his temples. "Because the night we met," he said quietly, "you were the only person in that entire building who didn't want anything from me. You didn't know who I was. You told me to move my car." She remembered. God, she remembered. "And I have spent 39 years, he went on, "surrounded by people who want. You looked at me like I was just a man parked in a loading zone. Do you have any idea what that's worth to someone like me?" The wind picked up. The velvet box sat between them like a third person at the table. And Tahlia Brooks, who had spent her whole life making herself small enough to fit inside other people's needs, felt something rise in her chest that she could not name, that was equal parts terror and the first real freedom she had ever tasted. But to understand how Tahlia ended up here, on a rooftop, being asked to choose a wedding venue by a man the FBI had a folder on, we need to go back. Back to a cramped office in Pioneer Square, a stolen design portfolio, and the night a stranger's car wouldn't move. If you've ever been the strong one, the fixer, the one everybody calls when their life falls apart but nobody calls just to ask how you're doing, then this story is for you. If you've ever given so much of yourself to people who'd never give it back, until you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the tired woman looking out, stay with me. Because what happened to Tahlia Brooks is going to feel familiar in a way that might sting at first. And then it's going to feel like permission. This is a story about a woman who spent her whole life being useful to everyone but herself. It's about the dangerous man who saw her clearly when she'd become invisible to everyone else, including herself. And it's about the question underneath all of it, the one I want you to sit with as we go. What do you actually owe the people who only love you when you're convenient? Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever been the strong one for too long? I read every single one. And if stories about women who finally choose themselves are your thing, hit subscribe, because that's all we do here, now. Let's go back to the beginning. Tahlia Brooks could design a brand identity that made strangers feel something, but she could not, for the life of her, make her own family feel anything for her at all. She worked at Meridian Creative, a boutique design studio wedged into the 3rd floor of a brick building in Pioneer Square. The kind of place with exposed beams and a kombucha tap, and a founder named Garrett Voss, who described himself in interviews as a visionary who happens to know how to delegate. What Garrett delegated mostly was the work. What he kept was the credit. For 4 years, Tahlia had been the studio's secret engine. The rebrand that landed Meridian on the cover of a regional design magazine? Hers. The packaging system for the organic skincare line that tripled the client's revenue? Hers, sketched at her kitchen table at 2 a.m, while her downstairs neighbor's bass thumped through the floor. Garrett presented all of it. He'd stand in the conference room with her boards behind him and say, "What we came up with." And the "we" always meant I. And Tahlia would sit in the back nodding because that was what you did when you needed the job. And she always needed the job. She was 34. She made $58,000 a year in a city where that was a polite fiction. And every month, like clockwork, a piece of it left her account before it had a chance to settle. The piece had a name. Her younger sister, Renee. Renee was 29 and gifted at exactly one thing, making her problems sound like Tahlia's responsibility. There was always a reason. The car needed transmission work, or she'd lose the job that she would lose anyway in 6 weeks. The deposit on the new apartment, because the old roommate situation had gotten toxic. The phone bill, the dentist, the time she co-signed something she shouldn't have. Each time, Renee would call crying, and each time Tahlia would feel that old machinery start up inside her. The one that had been installed when she was 11 and their mother got sick. The one that whispered, "You're the one who holds it together. You're the one who doesn't get to fall apart." Their mother, Carol, had been gone 6 years now. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. And in the long nights at the hospice, when Tahlia was 19 and 20, and doing everything because their father had walked out a decade prior, and someone had to. Carol had taken her hand and said the words that would shape the next 15 years of her life. "Promise me you'll take care of your sister. She's not as strong as you." Tahlia had promised. Of course she had. You don't say no to a dying woman. But somewhere along the way, the promise had calcified into a cage. Take care of her had become give her everything. She's not as strong as you had become. Your needs don't count. Because you can handle it, you can always handle it. So Tahlia handled it. She handled the $400 transfers and the $200 transfers, and the time it was $1,100 and she ate rice for a month. She handled Renee forgetting her birthday 3 years running. She handled the way her sister's voice went warm and sweet right up until the money cleared, then cooled into something distracted and impatient. She told herself it was love. She told herself this was what family meant. That was the lie she believed. If I just give enough, eventually they'll see me. Eventually I'll have earned the right to be taken care of too. She believed it about Renee. She believed it about Garrett, who dangled a promotion to creative director the way you'd dangle keys in front of a baby. Next quarter, definitely next quarter. We just need to get through this client cycle. She believed it about the man she'd dated for 2 years in her late 20s, Marcus, who'd left her for someone less intense, less all about everyone else's problems. The irony had nearly killed her. By the spring she turned 34, Tahlia Brooks owned exactly 3 things of value: a secondhand iMac, a portfolio of work that had her fingerprints all over it, and someone else's name on the cover, and a quiet, gnawing exhaustion that had started to feel like the natural state of being alive. She lived in a 1-bedroom in Beacon Hill, with a radiator that clanked and a window that looked out on a parking lot. She kept fresh flowers on the table, cheap grocery store carnations, because they were the one indulgence she allowed herself, and even then she felt vaguely guilty about the $4. There was a specific texture to her loneliness, and it was this: she was surrounded by people, and not one of them knew her. The studio was full of colleagues who liked her, who praised her work, who never once asked what she did on weekends. Renee called constantly and knew nothing about her. Couldn't have named her favorite color, her recurring nightmare, the song their mother used to hum. The barista at the place near her apartment knew her order. That was the depth of it. A medium drip and a name on a cup. She'd built her whole identity around being capable. Tahlia can handle it. Tahlia's got it. Ask Tahlia. And the terrible secret underneath the capability was that she'd never learned how to be anything else. so that when she lay awake at 3 in the morning, which was often, the question that circled her like a shark was not am I happy, but the far more frightening if I stopped being useful, would anyone keep me around at all? She suspected the answer was no. She arranged her entire life to avoid having to find out. She had not been on a date in 18 months. She had not taken a vacation in 4 years. When her one real friend, a sharp-tongued accountant named Priya, told her over wine that she was the most self-abandoning person I've ever met, and I do taxes for influencers, Tahlia had laughed it off. But the words stuck, self-abandoning, as if she had taken herself somewhere quiet years ago and simply left herself there, the way you'd leave a box of old clothes on a curb. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, that ordinary Tuesday in April when everything began, was that the life she'd been quietly surrendering, piece by piece, for 15 years, was about to be threatened all at once, and that the threat would arrive disguised as the worst thing that had ever happened to her, before it revealed itself as the best. It started with a stolen portfolio, and a car that wouldn't move. The car was a matte black Genesis sedan, and it was parked dead across the loading zone behind her building at 9:40 on a Tuesday night, and Tahlia Brooks was having absolutely none of it. She'd stayed late. Of course she'd stayed late. Garrett had a pitch the next morning to a hospitality group, a boutique hotel chain wanting a full visual identity, and the entire deck rested on a concept Tahlia had built from nothing over the past 3 weeks. He'd be presenting it. She'd be in the back. But it had to be perfect, because his perfect was her career, and so she'd reworked the typography until her eyes burned, and then carried her portfolio case down to catch the last bus. And there it was. The car, blocking everything. A man leaned against it, phone to his ear, speaking in low, rapid Korean, mid-40s maybe, charcoal coat that probably cost more than her car. The kind of stillness that should have warned her. It did not warn her. She was tired, and the bus came in 4 minutes. "Excuse me," she rapped on the trunk. "You're in a loading zone. I need to get to the curb." The man turned. Dark eyes, unreadable, a small scar through one eyebrow. He said something into the phone and ended the call without looking away from her. "There's no loading happening," he observed, "because your car is in the way." She gestured at the bus shelter visible down the block. "Some of us take public transit. Move it, please." For a long moment, he just looked at her. And then, she would replay this for months. The corner of his mouth moved, almost imperceptibly, like a man who'd discovered something unexpected. "You don't know who I am," he said, not a threat, genuine curiosity. "I know you're a guy whose car is in a loading zone," Tahlia said. "Should I know you? Are you somebody?" He laughed then, a real one surprised out of him. He pushed off the car, walked around, and opened the driver's door. "Get to your bus, miss. Not telling strangers my name in a parking lot." She was already moving. "Thank you for relocating your enormous car." She made the bus with 30 seconds to spare. She didn't think about him again until Thursday, when her entire world tipped over. Because on Thursday, Garrett Voss called her into his glass-walled office, closed the door, and told her, with the regretful, rehearsed gentleness of a man who had clearly practiced, that the studio was restructuring, that her role was being absorbed, and that today would be her last day. Severance, 2 weeks, the hospitality pitch she'd built. Killing it, by the way. Client loved it. So that's a nice note to go out on, right? Tahlia sat very still. "You're firing me, after I built the pitch that just landed your biggest client of the year." "It's not personal, Tahlia. It's runway. We have to be lean." "Is it lean to give that account to someone who can't do what I do?" Garrett's smile thinned. "We'll manage." She packed her desk into a banker's box. The carnations she'd brought in months ago, dried now, she left in the trash. And on her way out, she did the math. $58,000 a year, gone. 2 weeks of severance. Rent due in 18 days. A sister who'd texted that morning needing $400 for car insurance. She made it to the sidewalk before her legs stopped working, and she sat down hard on a cold metal bench in Occidental Park, banker's box in her lap, and did not cry, because she had forgotten how, somewhere around year 3 of holding everyone else together. "You look like someone took your loading zone." She looked up. The man from Tuesday, charcoal coat, scarred eyebrow. He was holding 2 coffees, and he held one out to her like they'd planned this, like the universe had a sense of humor she hadn't agreed to. "Are you following me?" she asked, too tired to be afraid. "I have an office across the square." He nodded at a restored brick building, the nicest on the block. "I saw you come out carrying your whole life in a box. I've carried a box like that. I bought 2 coffees." She should have walked away. Instead, she took the coffee because her hands were cold, and because something in the careful way he set it in her grip, no touch, no leer, just here, undid something in her. "Kang Do-sun," he said, sitting at the far end of the bench, a respectful distance. "Now you know my name, and you're not in a parking lot." "Tahlia Brooks." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I just got fired." "I know, I could tell." A pause. "I run a few businesses, real estate primarily, import logistics, some hospitality." He said it lightly, but there was a weight under the words, a sense of vast and careful omission. "I have a use for someone who can make things look like they're worth what I'm charging for them. You build brands?" "I built one this week. My boss is presenting it tomorrow with his name on it." Do-sun went still in that particular way she'd come to recognize. "Does he?" he said softly. "It's fine. That's how it works." "No," said Kang Do-sun, looking out at the square. "It really isn't." And in the way he said it, flat, certain, like a man who'd watched the rules of how things work and decided which ones he'd allow to apply to him, Tahlia Brooks felt the first thread of intrigue pull tight in her chest. Who was this man, who bought strangers coffee and spoke about her stolen work like it was a wound he intended to do something about? She would find out, and she would wish, for one terrible week, that she hadn't. She agreed to coffee again. Just coffee, she told herself. A man with hospitality businesses, a portfolio that needed building, and severance that wouldn't cover a month. It was a job conversation. That was all. It was not all. The first crack came on a Sunday, 10 days later. Tahlia had picked up freelance scraps to stay afloat, and she'd done a little quiet digging on her possible new client, because she was a professional, and you don't take money from someone you haven't Googled. Kang Do-sun returned a tasteful corporate website for something called Han Holdings, a couple of charity gala photos, and nothing else. No social media, no interviews. For a man who ran a few businesses, he had the digital footprint of a ghost. So she'd asked Priya, whose accounting firm did due diligence for half of Seattle's commercial real estate. Priya called her back that Sunday afternoon, and her voice was wrong. "Tahlia, where did you meet this guy?" "He bought me coffee." "Why?" "Okay, don't freak out." Which is how you know it's time to freak out. Han Holdings is real. The buildings are real. The money's real. But the name, Tahlia, 2 of our partners won't touch anything connected to that name. There have been federal inquiries. Money laundering through the import side, allegedly. There's talk he's connected to. I don't even want to say it on the phone. The word people use is organization, as in the organized kind. The radiator clanked. Tahlia stared at the parking lot through her window. "You're telling me he's a criminal?" "I'm telling you nobody can prove anything, which is almost worse, because it means he's good at it. Tahlia, this is not a design his hotel logo situation. This is a how is this man's number in your phone situation." She should have blocked him. She knew she should have. But here is the thing nobody tells you about a man like Kang Do-sun. He had not, in 2 coffees and a dozen texts, asked her for a single thing. He asked her how she slept. He asked whether her sister had paid her back. She hadn't. Tahlia had lied and said she had. He hadn't believed her and hadn't pushed. He'd noticed she ordered the cheapest thing on every menu and started ordering 2 of the expensive things to share so she wouldn't feel watched. In 2 weeks, Kang Do-sun had paid more attention to Tahlia Brooks than her own family had in a decade. So instead of blocking him, she did something reckless. She texted, "We need to talk. In person. Somewhere public." He chose a tea house in the International District, full of grandmothers and Sunday light. He was already there when she arrived, and he stood when she came in, which nobody had done for her in years. "You found something," he said before she sat. "Federal inquiries, money laundering, the word organization." She kept her voice level. "I need to know what I'm sitting across from. No charm, no deflection. The truth, or I walk and you never hear from me again." For a long moment, Kang Do-sun looked at her the way a man looks at the last bridge out of a place he's been trying to leave his whole life. "My father built something," he said finally. "When he came here from Busan with nothing. It started as protection for shopkeepers who couldn't get it anywhere else, in a neighborhood the police forgot. It became more than that. By the time it came to me, it was the thing your friends' partners won't touch." He turned his teacup a slow quarter turn. "I have spent 11 years trying to make the legal parts grow large enough to swallow the rest. The real estate is clean. The hospitality is clean. The import business is closer to clean than it was. The inquiries are real. They haven't charged me because there's nothing left to charge. But the name follows me. It will always follow me. So it's true. I am the head of an organization I did not build, and have spent a decade dismantling from the inside, which is the most dangerous way to dismantle anything." His eyes met hers. "I told you the truth in the parking lot. You didn't want anything from me. Do you understand how rare you are? Everyone wants something. My own people want me to stay exactly what my father made me. And I am trying to become something else. And it is the loneliest thing I've ever done." The grandmothers laughed at the next table. The light moved across the floor. "There's something else," he said, and now his voice dropped, careful. "And you should hear it from me before you hear it any other way. The hospitality group. The boutique hotel chain your old boss pitched. The one whose brand identity you built." He paused. "I own a controlling interest in the parent company. I'd already seen your work, your actual work, before I ever parked in your loading zone. The proposal had your initials in the file metadata. TBI asked who TB was. The agency said there was no TB. They said it was all Garrett Voss." The room tilted. "You knew," Tahlia whispered. "When you bought me the coffee, you already knew he stole it." "I knew he'd lied about who made the only good thing in that entire pitch. I didn't follow you to the bench by accident." He didn't look away, didn't soften it. "I went looking for the person whose name had been erased. And then, a week earlier in a parking lot, that same person had told me to move my car without knowing a thing about me. I am not a man who believes in fate. But Tahlia, I started believing in something." This was so much worse and so much better than she'd thought. The stranger wasn't a stranger. The job wasn't a job. And the quiet erasure she'd accepted as the cost of her life had been seen, catalogued, investigated, witnessed, by the one man in the city powerful enough to do something about it, and dangerous enough that letting him terrified her. She had come to this tea house to end something. She left it understanding that something had only just begun, and that the next move was hers, and it would cost her either her safety or her self-respect, and she could not yet tell which. Priya staged something close to an intervention. She showed up at Tahlia's apartment with takeout and a legal pad, which is how you know an accountant means business. "Walk me through it," Priya said, "like I'm going to have to explain it to a judge, because I might. He hasn't asked me for anything illegal. He's offering me a job, real branding work for the clean side of his business, salary." Tahlia named the number Do-sun had floated. Priya's chopsticks stopped midair. "That's almost 3 times what Garrett paid you." "For more responsibility. I'd be building the entire identity for his hospitality group's expansion. Priya, it's the job I've wanted my whole career. It just happens to come attached to a man with a federal file." Priya set the chopsticks down. "Okay. I'm going to be your friend and your forensic accountant at the same time, which is a lot of hats. As your accountant, a paycheck from a clean subsidiary is a paycheck. People work for companies with sketchy owners every day. As long as the work is legitimate and documented, you are not laundering anything by designing a logo. As your friend," her voice changed, "I've never seen you light up talking about a man before, and that scares me more than the federal thing, because you have terrible judgment about who deserves you. You gave Renee your whole 20s. You gave Garrett your whole portfolio. What is this man going to take?" It was the right question. Tahlia carried it for 3 days. When she finally went to see Dosun, she went to his office, the restored brick building on the square, all warm wood and quiet. He didn't sit behind the desk. He sat in the chair beside hers, which she noticed. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." 1. The job is the job. Branding, identity, real work, documented, on the books, taxes withheld, the whole legitimate apparatus. If I ever find out you're using my designs to make something dirty look clean, I'm gone, and I'll take what I know to your federal friends. She watched his face. He didn't flinch. He almost smiled. 2. Whatever this is between us, the coffee, the noticing, it stays separate from the work. I've spent my whole life letting people blur the lines between what they owe me and what they feel about me. Not again. You're my employer, or you're my... whatever you are. Not both at once. Not in the same room. Agreed, Dosun said. Though I'll tell you now, I intend to court the whatever I am with the same seriousness I'd give a hostile acquisition. On my own time, with your consent at every step. And the day you tell me to stop, I stop. And your job stays exactly the same. That's my condition back. 3. This was the hard one. I need you to be honest with me about the danger. Not the romantic version, the real version. If being near you puts me at risk, I deserve to choose that with my eyes open, not find out the hard way. And here, Kang Dosun did something she had not expected. He got up, went to the window, and was quiet for a long time. There is risk, he said. I won't pretend otherwise. Most of the men who built this thing with my father are dead or in prison, or have made their peace with what I'm doing, but not all of them. There is one in particular, my father's old lieutenant, a man named Bayek, who believes I am betraying everything we are. He has not moved against me directly, but he watches. The 2 men in the car you've noticed, they're not watching you. They're watching the people who might watch you. I put them there the day after the tea house, because the moment you became important to me, you became a way to reach me. Tahlia's mouth went dry. You're saying I could get hurt because of who you are. I'm saying I will spend every resource I have making sure you don't. And I'm saying you have every right to walk out of this office and never see me again. And I will make sure you're safe even if you do, because protecting you is not contingent on you choosing me. He turned. That's the honest version. It's not romantic. It's a man telling you that loving him is not free, and letting you decide whether the price is one you're willing to pay. I won't decide it for you. I've spent my life having my fate decided for me. I'd never do that to you. The radiator wasn't there, but Tahlia heard the ghost of it anyway, the clank of every small life she'd settled for. Here is what she understood, sitting in that warm wooden room. Kang Dosun was the first person who had ever offered her tools instead of a rescue. He wasn't going to fix her life. He was handing her a real job that paid real money and asking nothing dishonest in return. He wasn't going to absorb her into his needs. He was telling her the truth and letting her choose. Renee had taken, Garrett had taken, Marcus had taken. This man, who could take anything he wanted from anyone in the city, was the only one putting the choice in her hands. I'll take the job, she said, on all 3 conditions. And the whatever I am? One thing at a time, Kang Dosun. But she was smiling when she said it, and they both knew what the smile meant. She walked out of that building with a salary, a contract Priya would later pronounce annoyingly airtight and completely legitimate, and a decision that would detonate the careful, self-abandoning architecture of her entire life. The first thing it blew up was Garrett Voss. The job paid Tahlia enough within 2 months to do something she'd never done. She got a lawyer, not for Dosun, for Garrett. Because here is what she'd learned in those 2 months of working real work for real money. The rebrand Garrett had presented to the hospitality group, the one that had gone out on a nice note, was hers, documented as hers, time-stamped in files, in drafts, in email threads, where she'd sent him iterations he'd barely commented on before slapping his name on the cover, and the contract she'd signed with Meridian Creative 4 years ago, the one she'd never read closely because she was 29 and grateful, had a work-for-hire clause that was, her new lawyer informed her, shockingly sloppy and probably unenforceable on at least 3 of these projects. The lawyer's name was Denise Okafor, and she had a way of saying, "We're going to win this," that made Tahlia believe it before she'd seen any evidence. "You have moral rights of attribution on the published work," Denise said, spreading printouts across her desk. "He entered your designs into a regional competition under his own name. He won. There's a trophy with your work on it and his name engraved. That's not just sleazy, Tahlia. In a couple of these instances, that's actionable. We file for proper attribution, damages, and we make it very public, because men like Garrett Voss survive on reputation, and reputation is the thing he stole from you." "He'll fight it," Tahlia said. "He'll say it was collaborative. He'll say it was work for hire." "Let him. I've read the contract. Have you?" She had, finally, and it was sloppy. The first boundary Tahlia set in her entire adult life was a cease and desist letter to Garrett Voss, demanding he correct the attribution on 6 published projects and the competition entry, plus damages. The response came fast and ugly. Garrett called her cell at 10 p.m., voice tight with the particular rage of a man who'd never once been told no by someone he'd decided was beneath him. "You ungrateful. I made you, Tahlia. I gave a nobody a chance, and this is... You gave a nobody 60% of market rate and stole her work for 4 years." Her voice didn't shake. She was as surprised by this as he was. "Talk to my lawyer, Denise Okafor. I'll text you the number." "You don't have the money to fight me." "I do now," said Tahlia, and hung up and sat in the dark with her heart slamming, and a smile she couldn't stop spreading across her face. The pushback didn't stop with Garrett. Renee called 2 days later, and the timing wasn't a coincidence. Renee had a way of sensing when Tahlia's money or attention had moved somewhere that wasn't her. "I heard you have some fancy new job," Renee said, the warmth dialed up to its pre-withdrawal setting. "I'm so happy for you, Tay. Listen, the thing is, I'm in a real bind with the—" "How much?" Tahlia said, flat. "I mean, 2,000 would get me totally clear, but even—" "No." A silence so complete Tahlia could hear her sister's television in the background. "What did you say?" "I said no, Renee. I'm not sending you $2,000. I'm not sending you any dollars. I've sent you... I did the math last week. Do you want to know the number? Since Mom died, I've given you $41,000. $41,000. And you forgot my last 3 birthdays. That is so unfair. You know I've been going through... You're always going through something, and I'm always the one who pays for it. I'm done. I love you. I'm done." She hung up on her sister for the first time in her life, and then she sat on her bathroom floor and cried for an hour, because boundaries don't feel like victory when you set them. They feel like grief. They feel like betraying a promise you made to a dying woman. It would take her months to understand that take care of your sister had never meant let your sister consume you. That her mother, if she'd known what the promise would become, would have torn it up herself. She told Dosen about it over dinner. A real dinner now, the whatever they were, having quietly become dinners twice a week. She told him about the $41,000 and the bathroom floor. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer to talk to Renee, which she'd half feared, and which would have ended everything. He just listened, and when she was done, he said, "My father used to say that the people who love you for your usefulness will always call your boundaries cruelty. It took me a long time to learn that their disappointment is the sound of a cage door closing. From the inside, it feels like loss. From the outside, anyone can see it's the lock finally turning." She put down her fork. "Who hurt you, that you know all this?" "Everyone," Dosen said simply. "Same as you." "We just wore different uniforms." There was something else she noticed in those weeks. Working real work for real money. She was better than she'd let herself believe. At Meridian, under Garrett's thumb, she'd absorbed a quiet message that her talent was a kind of luck, that she happened to be good, the way some people happen to be tall, and that it could vanish as easily as it had arrived. But building an entire identity system for Dosen's hospitality expansion, with no one editing her into smallness, she discovered that her work got better the more room she had. The constraints had never been creative. They'd been about keeping her in her place, remove the place, and she expanded to fill the space she'd actually always deserved. She started sleeping better. She noticed it one morning with a kind of shock. She'd slept through the night, the shark hadn't circled, and she'd woken up curious about her own day instead of braced against it. If you've ever had to choose between someone else's comfort and your own survival, between the promise you made and the person you're becoming, drop a comment and tell me what you chose. And if this story is landing somewhere real for you, hit that subscribe button, because the next part is where it all comes to a head, and you're not going to want to miss what happens in that courtroom. Because Garrett Voss, it turned out, had decided to fight, and men who fight Denise Okafor tend to regret it in public. The attribution dispute didn't go to a full trial. These things rarely do. But it went to a hearing that Garrett, in a fit of ego, insisted on attending personally, and that turned out to be the worst decision of his professional life. The Regional Design Association, it emerged, had a strict policy on fraudulent competition entries. Denise had quietly brought them in. And so, on a gray Wednesday in a downtown conference room that smelled of carpet cleaner and nerves, Garrett Voss sat across a long table from Tahlia Brooks, 2 lawyers, and a representative from the association, holding a folder that would end his standing in the only community whose opinion he cared about. The evidence was not close. Tahlia's drafts, time-stamped over weeks. Garrett's emails, "Looks good, ship it," sent minutes after receiving fully realized work he claimed to have created. The metadata. The fonts she'd custom licensed under her own name. A 4-year paper trail of a man taking credit, laid out in chronological order by a forensic accountant who did this for fun. Tahlia watched Garrett across the table and felt the strangest thing. A memory of all the conference rooms she'd sat in at the back of, nodding, while he stood at the front taking her bows. She'd told herself, every single time, that it didn't matter, that the work was what mattered, not the credit. That she was above caring about something so vain as her name. It had taken losing the job, meeting a man who'd gone looking for her erased name, and a forensic accountant with a vendetta, to understand that she'd never been above caring. She'd just been too afraid of seeming difficult to admit she was being robbed. She wasn't above it anymore. She watched Garrett squirm, and she let herself want the win, fully, without apology. "Mr. Voss," the association rep said, "did you or did you not personally design the visual identity submitted under your name to the 2024 regional showcase?" Garrett's lawyer leaned in to murmur. Garrett waved him off because Garrett had never in his life believed the rules applied to Garrett. "I directed the creative vision. Design is collaborative. Tahlia was a contributor. You wrote, and I quote from your email of March 8th. Denise slid a paper across the table. "Just make it look expensive. You're the one with the eye." "Is that you directing a creative vision, Mr. Voss? Or is that you asking your employee to do the entire job while you took the trophy?" The silence in that room was the most satisfying sound Tahlia had ever heard. It came apart for Garrett quickly after that. The association rescinded the award and issued a public correction naming Tahlia Brooks as sole designer. The settlement Denise extracted included corrected attribution on all 6 published projects, a sum of damages Tahlia would never disclose, but that covered her lawyer and a year of breathing room besides. And this was the part Tahlia hadn't asked for, the part Denise won out of pure spite. A written acknowledgement from Meridian Creative, on letterhead, that the work was hers. Garrett tried to corner her in the elevator afterward. The doors had almost closed when he stuck his arm in, and there he was, deflated, the visionary who happened to know how to delegate, finally out of people to delegate to. "You've ruined me," he said. "I hope you know that. Nobody's going to forget this." Tahlia looked at him, and the thing she felt was not triumph exactly. It was something cleaner. It was the feeling of finally seeing someone at their actual size. "Garrett," she said gently, "you ruined yourself. You just got used to me being there to make it look like you hadn't." The elevator chimed. "I'm going to need you to take your arm out of the door. I have a meeting." He took his arm out of the door. She did have a meeting, as it happened, with Dawson's hospitality group, presenting the next phase of the brand identity, this time with her name on every single board. She walked into that conference room in a building that, somewhere up the ownership chain, belonged to a man with a federal file, and she presented her own work under her own name to a room full of people who knew it was hers. And when she finished, there was applause, and it was for her. And she had to look at the floor for a second because she was not used to the weight of being seen. Dawson was in the back of the room. He'd insisted on sitting where Garrett used to make her sit. "So you can see what it looks like from the front." He didn't say a word during the presentation, but when it ended, he was the last to stop clapping, and the look on his face was not the look of a man admiring a woman. It was the look of a man watching someone he loved become exactly who she was supposed to be, and understanding that he'd had nothing to do with it, and being glad. That night, on the walk to her bus, she still took the bus, she liked the bus, Dawson said, "You don't need me, do you?" "You thought you might when this started. You don't." "No," Tahlia said, "I don't need you." His face did something complicated. "Which is exactly," she went on, "why I'm allowed to want you. I spent my whole life being needed and calling it love. I'm not doing that anymore. Need and love aren't the same thing. I'm learning the difference." She stopped under a streetlight. "I don't need you, Kang Dawson. I want you. Those are very different sentences, and only one of them is safe to build something on." He kissed her, then, for the first time, under a streetlight in Pioneer Square, with one of the two men in the black car politely studying his phone 40 feet away. It would have been a perfect ending. It was not the ending. Because the past, as Tahlia was about to learn, does not knock politely. It shows up at your door at the worst possible moment and asks you to be small again. Renee came to her apartment on a Sunday in October, and she brought their Aunt Vivian for reinforcement, and the two of them sat on Tahlia's second-hand couch like a tribunal. "We're worried about you," Vivian opened. Vivian, who Tahlia had not heard from in 2 years. "This man you're seeing, Renee says he's involved in things." "Renee says a lot of things." Tahlia stayed standing. "What is this, Renee? You couldn't get money out of me, so you brought Aunt Viv to stage a rescue?" "You've changed," Renee said, and the way she said it made clear she did not mean it as a compliment. You used to be there, for the family. Now you've got money you won't share, and a scary boyfriend, and you act like you're better than us." "I act like I'm a person," Tahlia said. "That's the part you can't stand. Not that I changed, that I stopped being a resource and started being a person." Vivian tried the other angle, the one Tahlia had braced for, the one that had run her entire adult life. "Your mother asked you to take care of your sister, on her deathbed. Have you forgotten that?" And there it was, the promise, weaponized, the way it had been weaponized for 15 years. Tahlia sat down then, across from them, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not rage, but a deep and final calm. "I think about that promise every day," she said quietly. "I made it when I was 19, holding my mother's hand while she died, and I have honored it for 15 years to the tune of $41,000, and most of my 20s, and a part of myself I'm only now getting back. So no, Aunt Vivian, I haven't forgotten it." She looked at Renee. "But I've thought about what Mom actually meant. She didn't say, 'Give Renee everything.' She didn't say, 'Let Renee use you until there's nothing left.' She said, 'Take care of your sister.' And I've come to believe, I really believe this now, that taking care of you, Renee, means stopping. It means not handing you money every time you have a feeling, because all that ever did was teach you that you never have to grow up. The most caring thing I can do is let you face your own life." That's a convenient story, Renee snapped, now that you've got better things to spend your money on. It's the truest thing I've ever said to you. Tahlia stood and walked to the door and opened it. Mom asked me to take care of you. She never asked me to disappear. I'm done disappearing. If you ever want a sister instead of a bank, you know where I live. But you can't have the old me back. I left her on a curb. I'm not going to pick her back up. They left, Vivian first, stiff with offense. Renee at the door paused, and for 1 second something young and frightened flickered across her face. The little sister, the one Tahlia had genuinely loved, underneath 15 years of transaction. And then it closed again, and she was gone. Tahlia shut the door. She slid down it to the floor in the same posture she'd cried in months ago. But she didn't cry this time. She just sat and breathed, and felt the apartment around her go quiet and entirely her own. Her phone buzzed. Dosun. How did it go? She typed, I held the line. It hurt. I'd do it again. A pause. Then, that's the whole thing, isn't it? The hurt and the doing it again. That's what it costs to belong to yourself. She read it 3 times. Then she got up off the floor, a woman who had just chosen the person she was becoming over every obligation she'd been handed at the worst moment of her life. And she put fresh flowers in a vase. Not carnations, peonies, the expensive ones. Because she could, and because she wanted them, and because wanting things for herself had stopped feeling like a crime. She didn't know yet that the choice she'd just made, to belong to herself first, was the exact thing that would make everything that came after possible. The promotion, the independence, the kind of love that only 2 whole people can build. She was about to find all of it, and she was going to find it on her own terms, with her own name on it. The offer came in November, and it had nothing to do with Kang Dosun, which was the entire point. The hospitality group's expansion had drawn attention. A national design publication ran a feature on the rebrand, the one with Tahlia Brooks' name on it, the one she'd presented herself. And a week after it published, she got an email from a firm in the Bay Area, the kind of firm she'd once pinned screenshots of to a mood board labeled Someday. They wanted to talk about a creative director role, remote-friendly. A team of her own, a salary that made her sit down when she read it. She'd told no one at Dosun's company she was even looking. She hadn't been looking. The opportunity had found her, because for the first time in her career, her work carried her actual name, and her name, it turned out, was worth something. She told Dosun over dinner. She'd braced for, she didn't know what. For him to be wounded that she'd consider leaving his orbit. For him to offer her more money to stay. For the thing she'd always experienced, where a man's support evaporated the second it stopped being convenient for him. Instead, Kang Dosun put down his chopsticks and said, Creative Director, your own team, the title you've earned for 10 years and never been given. And then he smiled fully, the scar through his eyebrow lifting. Take it. It might be remote, but it's their firm, their world, not connected to you at all. That, he said, is precisely why you should take it, Tahlia. I have watched you spend months proving you don't need me. Don't undo it now by staying somewhere safe because of me. The whole reason He stopped, started again. The thing I love about you is that you're nobody's resource anymore. You'd be a hypocrite to become mine, and I'd be a liar if I let you. She took the job. She negotiated it herself. Denise looked over the contract, but Tahlia ran the negotiation, and she negotiated like a woman who finally understood her own worth, and she got the salary and the title and a signing bonus that, on the day it cleared, she stared at in her banking app for a full 10 minutes. The first thing she did with real money, real, earned, hers, was not send it to anyone. The second thing she did was the thing she'd been quietly dreaming of for 4 years. She put a deposit on a small studio space in Georgetown, a sunlit corner with brick walls and big windows, not for Dosun's company and not for the Bay Area firm, but for her. For the side practice she'd build on weekends, for her own clients, her own name on the door, Brooks Design, in a typeface she'd drawn herself. She stood in the empty studio the day she got the keys, sunlight pouring across the bare floor, And she thought about the woman on the metal bench in Occidental Park, with her whole life in a banker's box. That woman had believed that if she just gave enough, eventually someone would take care of her. This woman knew better. This woman had taken care of herself, and discovered she'd been capable of it the whole time. She called Priya, who cried, which made Tahlia cry. She called her old self, metaphorically, the one she'd left on the curb, and she said goodbye properly. She did not call Renee, and the fact that she felt only a small, clean ache about it, not the old guilt, just the honest grief of a relationship that had to change, told her how far she'd come. That night, Dosen came to see the studio. He stood in the doorway and didn't come in, because she hadn't invited him in yet, and he understood the difference now better than anyone. "It's yours," he said. Not a question, a recognition. "It's mine." She looked around at the brick and the light. "I made this, not you, not Garrett, not anyone I gave myself away to. Me." "I know," Dosen said. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." And he wasn't looking at the studio when he said it, but he also wasn't looking at her the way a man looks at something he wants to possess. He was looking at her the way you look at proof that the world can be more just than you'd dared to hope. She let him in then, into the studio, and into the part of herself she'd guarded longest. It was the first room she'd ever fully owned, and she got to choose who entered it, and she chose him. Not because she had to, not because she needed him, but because she'd built a self solid enough to share. They were 3 months into being something with a name, together, a word Tahlia still tested on her tongue like a new language. When Dosen finally let her all the way in, it happened on a night when the danger he'd warned her about, all those months ago in his office, stopped being theoretical. Beck made his move, not against Tahlia, Dosun's careful walls held, but against Dosun himself, an attempt to wrest back control of the import business, the dirtiest piece, the part Dosun had spent a decade scrubbing toward legitimacy. There were tense weeks. There were nights Dosun didn't sleep, and one night he showed up at her apartment at 2 a.m., looking like a man who'd been holding a wall up with his bare hands. And here is where the old Tahlia would have done something familiar. She would have made herself useful. She would have absorbed his crisis, made it her job to fix him, poured herself into his need until she vanished, because being needed was the only love she'd ever trusted. She didn't do that. "I'm not going to fix this for you," she said, handing him tea, sitting across from him, not pulling him into her lap. "I can't. It's not mine to fix. But I'm here, and I want to know how you actually are, not the version where you're handling it, the real one." And Kang Dosun, a man who had spent his entire life being the one others leaned on, the one who carried, the one who could not afford to be seen cracking, put his face in his hands and told her the truth, that he was afraid, that he'd been afraid for 11 years, that dismantling the thing his father built had cost him friendships and sleep and a version of himself he sometimes missed, the simpler version who'd just done what he was told. That the loneliest part was that he had no one to tell, because everyone in his world either depended on his strength or wanted to exploit his weakness, and there was no one, there had been no one, in his entire life, who just wanted to know how he was. "Until you," he said. "You told me to move my car, and then you never once asked me for anything. Do you understand what that's been? To finally have someone who isn't a soldier or a supplicant?" Tahlia took his hands. "I know exactly what it's been," she said, "because you were that for me too. The first person who looked at me and saw a person instead of a resource. We found the same thing in each other. We were both starving for the same meal." It was the most honest conversation either of them had ever had, and it changed the shape of what they were. Because up to that night, there had been a quiet imbalance neither had named. Dosun, the powerful one, the protector, the man with resources. Tahlia, the one who'd been rescued from a metal bench. But that night, the ledger evened. He'd shown her his fear. She'd held it without trying to own it. 2 whole people, neither needing the other, both choosing. He resolved the Beck situation in the end, quietly, legally, with the federal inquiry he'd spent a decade not fighting, suddenly becoming a tool he could aim. He gave them what they needed to take Bayek and the worst of the old organization off the board, and in doing so, he finally severed the last cord tying him to his father's world. It cost him. Some of the men he'd grown up with would never speak to him again, but he walked out the other side of it cleaner than he'd been in his life, and he did it as a choice, the way Tahlia had chosen her own boundaries, knowing it would hurt, doing it anyway. "I'm not the man the FBI has a file on anymore," he told her. "I'm just a man who owns some hotels and loves a woman with her own design studio. The file's still going to follow you. Let it. I know who I am now, the name my father gave me and the man I made myself into instead. Both true, neither one a cage." He looked at her. "You taught me that you can honor where you came from without letting it own you. You did it with your mother's promise. I did it with my father's empire. Same lesson, different uniform." They were not a fairy tale. He was a complicated man with a complicated past, and 2 employees who still, out of old habit, sometimes idled in a black car outside nice restaurants. She was a woman who still flinched occasionally when someone needed something, who had to consciously choose her own peony expensive wants over the reflex to disappear. But they were equals. They were honest. And when he started, half joking, to talk about the future, she let herself imagine it without the old terror that imagining good things would jinx them, which is how they ended up, on a clear night in spring, exactly 1 year after a car wouldn't move in a loading zone on a rooftop, with a velvet box and 2 venue options, and Tahlia Brooks's hands shaking. "Pick a venue," Kang Dosen had said, and Tahlia had laughed and accused him of moving too fast, and demanded to know why me, and he'd told her, "Because you were the only person who didn't want anything from me." Now, on the rooftop, with the city holding its breath and the fairy lights steady overhead, Tahlia Brooks picked up the velvet box. She didn't open it yet. She held it, and she looked at the man who had seen her when she'd become invisible to herself, and she understood the real reason the whole thing terrified her. It wasn't the danger. It wasn't his past. It was that, for the first time in her life, someone was offering her a future where she got to want things, out loud, without apology, without earning it through endless self-sacrifice first. "You're not asking me to take care of you," she said slowly. "You're not asking me to disappear into your life. You're asking me to bring my whole self, the studio, the career, the name on my own door, all of it." "All of it," Dosen agreed. "I don't want a resource, Tahlia. God knows I've had enough soldiers. I want a partner who'll tell me to move my car for the rest of my life." She opened the box. She said yes, but on her terms, with a prenup Denise would draw up, and a clause keeping Brooks' design entirely her own, and a clear-eyed understanding that they were 2 complete people choosing each other, not 2 halves desperately clinging. She picked the conservatory, by the way, the one downtown, full of light and growing things. It felt right for a woman who'd spent 15 years buried and had finally come up into the sun. So here's what I want you to take from Tahlia's story. She didn't get rescued. Nobody saved her. The dangerous man with the federal file didn't fix her life. He handed her tools and got out of her way and loved her enough to let her become herself without him. The fixing, the boundaries, the studio, the name on the door. She did all of that. He just happened to be the first person who refused to let her disappear. If you've spent your life being the strong one, the giver, the resource, hear me. You are allowed to want things. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to stop disappearing. And the people who only loved you when you were convenient? Their disappointment is just the sound of your cage door closing. If this story moved you, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me about the moment you stopped disappearing, or the moment you're still working toward. Share this with the person in your life who needs to hear it tonight. And subscribe, because every week we tell stories about women who stopped giving themselves away. Tahlia Brooks didn't get a fairy tale ending. She got something better. She got herself back.